has no idea who those are. Somebody's device. Okay, now we'd like to start. We want to discuss the inevitable. For a while now, the streets have been full of mostly young people. The online streets have also been full of mostly young people asking for some things. And today we want to reflect on that. Now, before we start, we got you. We went far and wide. We sought and found a highly sought after performing artist to just get us in the mood for this discussion, to just bring our thoughts to the discussion. He will be performing this year's anthem. We have a national anthem, and then this year, I think we have had an anthem. This one you may know CJ. So after he finishes performing, I will ask you if you can tell who the original performer of that song is. Round of applause for Gibson, the violinist. He's also GenZ. Thank you. No. That one you know. All right? Yes. Let's appreciate Gibson one more time. Let's appreciate Gibson one more time. That's a young, talented Gen Z who's actually working very hard. So just appreciate him one more time. I mean, that's some rare talent Thank you so much, Gibson. And that's a good way for us to begin our discussion on the Gen Z revolution. You have interacted with our panelists in the previous session, and we will just be adding one more, Maryanne Njogu, who is the voice of Gen Z in this discussion, alongside, of course, yours truly. Maryanne will be joining us from Zoom. And of course, we have Chief Justice Emeritus Professor Willy Mutunga, who you may know was a revolutionary of his time. And we also have Professor John Ambani, who is a revolutionary in his own way. And so we'd like to start. You still are. You still are. But like when you were younger, you're still courageous. But like back in the day when you were arrested and detained, that was something substantial. They haven't arrested you now, but that was something. So I would be referring to that in that sense. Maryanne, so we can start with Maryanne Njogu. You know our panelists, so maybe let me introduce you to Maryanne. Maryanne is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, an alumna of Kabarak Law School, and she is a Gen Z in the proper sense of a Gen Z. She was in the streets. We saw her trying to recall her MP. She was trying to collect signatures to recall her MP. So she's really in this movement, both feet, with a full heart. So Maryanne, welcome. And we'd like to start with you. And you can introduce yourself before I ask you your question.
Thank you very much. I hope I am audible. As introduced, my name is Maryanne, an advocate of the High Court.
As introduced, my name is Maryanne, an advocate of the High Court.
Currently an associate at M&A Law Africa, and I'm proud to be an alumnus of the great Kabarak Law School. And it is a pleasure to be with you, reflecting on this conversation of the Gen Z protest, and a lot of respect also to the CJ Emeritus, Mutunga. I remember recently during other protests when we had actually went viral, being in the supermarket and trying to buy them bread and food and something to eat. So they are still contributing in a very great way to the protests that are even happening in the current generations and the protests that have been in the recent past. And we are drawing a lot of strength and admiration from them. Yes.
So I'd like to start by asking you, what is it? What is it, Gen Z, in street parlance? Ni nini shida, mnataka nini? Why the revolution?
Thank you very much for that question. And I enjoyed really
And to you
starting this
specifically,
section.
why do you safe as you answer?
I really enjoyed starting with this session with the song Daima Minium Kenya. It was actually the words were actually part of the presentation that I would have made. And this Gen Z revolution, actually, the Gen Z revolution was given after we were at the streets. At the beginning of it, yeah, we did not really term it or understand it as a Gen Z revolution. It started with a conversation on social media about the finance bill, although that there were other triggers, the consistent corruption. We had already started issues with the anti-femicide. I was part of the people who were in the streets during that time. So there has been a consistent conversation that has been going about the things that are happening in the nation through social media. And at some point, it blew up now when we were using social media to try and interpret the finance bill 2024, to the extent that people even used chat GPT version to try and understand and interpret and get the segments of the bill. So when the understanding and the conversation began on what actually is in the bill, using social media, trying to show the corruption that is there. And throughout and through, we can tell you for sure that even in the discussions we've had, we have no problem paying taxes. But the problem was, how are the taxes being utilized? Yeah. So we did not see any projects. There was a lot of corruption, mismanagement of funds. You've already seen something like typing errors costing the country millions of money in a very important institution like NHIF. And it cost a lot of range. And we went to the streets, and I have been on the streets from the very first day of the protest. In the midst of work, lunch hour, back to the streets. I would always carry my flag and the firimbi and my phone. And those have been the tools of trade for many Gen Zs, the flag, the whistle, and their phones. And so we started and we went to the streets on the very first day, and we when it was still new. In the morning, I remember just before they dropped the punitive taxes on bread and pads, we were already at the lane that is leading to City Hall, and we were already chanting, saying we are peaceful, but this has to be rejected and not amended. And so when the noise began, and it was now evident that the people who are here are young, even the way we were dressed. At some point, I know some of you have seen my photos. I went to the streets in a very nice dress. I just put down the heels and wore rubber shoes, and I had full makeup on. Yeah. And I was on the streets chanting. So when people would look at the category of the people who are on the streets, they realize these are actually very, very young people. And in the process of protesting, I even met a lady who, back in high school when I was in Form 4, I was their school mother when they were in Form 1. And I turned and I was like, oh my God, even these ones have finished school and they're on the streets. So it was completely young people. And when we retreated back home is when the conversation started that this is a Gen Z protest. But why these protests for the Gen Zs have been revolutionary in its sense is it how it defies what we are used to. And revolutions is about transformation that is shifting dynamics. Yeah, this is a protest that is defied not just by young people but people who are, they are not being ruled by tribal lines. Yeah. And most of the times on the streets, I actually never got to know the groups in terms of their tribes or in terms of their age or their political affiliation. So when you hear the Gen Zs say, we are tribeless, we are partyless, we are leaderless. In every form and in every way, being on those protests, I have actually seen that this revolution is defying the lines that we are used to that are ethnic, political. You must have a political leader who's leading you on the streets and crying for your rights. It's even defied religion, because as you've seen, there has been a backlash with, of course, the church, thinking when you're saying we're occupying the churches, that we are trying to fight the church. But this revolution has gone to the extent that any institution that is encouraging bad governance, tolerating it, has to be questioned, and also has to be put on the line that we do not want to allow this kind of conformism. And of course, after the finance bill was passed, the range was on to actually recall the MPs. I remember, because I'm going to speak from personal experience, at the time, what caused the range, including even all the way to going into parliament. You can imagine we had chanted from morning, and it's like we were also taking shifts. So let me tell you the things that were happening on the ground for in reality, that we were actually even taking shifts, because people are wondering why we're not getting tired. And when the people start in town in the morning, we will take a break probably during lunch hour, and there are people coming from Thika Road and different areas now being able to access town. So when we were chanting from morning, trying to petition that the people who are seated in parliament hear that there is noise outside, and we are trying to say, reject, do not amend, this bill is punitive, and they still went ahead and voted yes. And at that time, there was still shooting that was happening despite us shouting, we were peaceful, we are peaceful. We even tried to, stand and not move, we are peaceful. But they were still shooting at the crowd, and we had tear gas canisters and all that. And the crowd just went crazy, because who are these people representing? If we are out here saying reject this bill, and you go ahead and pass the bill, and that is what the range that you saw happen on Tuesday. And for sure, let me tell you, and being honest, that the fire that is in the young people is beyond, because when they were shooting and now using live bullets, because we could tell the difference of the sounds, and I can still remember how it sounded in my mind. Instead of retreating, we went forward. We now ran and moved past the police officers and the people who were trying to barricade our way into parliament. And the range was on, because why are you killing young people who are peaceful protesters trying to exercise their constitutionally protected rights? And since then, now the conversation has shifted. And it has shifted to all those MPs, or the MPs who have failed, and to the extent have even voted twice, betrayed the people that they represent because they are delegates twice, needs to go home. And when I saw the conversation happening between the people of Dagoretti South, I'm a voter in Dagoretti South, and my MP is Kiari, who was previously in the joke and media and entertainment industry. And I said, yes, we need to hold them accountable and we need to recall them. And I said, okay, I will contribute to the best of my capability. And that is how I even became a petitioner in the petition that we are still preparing as we wait and push for the constitution of IEBC, so that we are able to exercise the right to recall. So this is how the movement is. It's not being led. It's, this is the conversation. This is my contribution. The conversation was, they've betrayed us. They've said yes. They have not been accountable to us. Let us recall. And people would say, yes, I'm going to be a petitioner in my constituency. I'm going to be, and that is how I've even ended up all the way here, to the extent that you're now seeing I am trying to continue the conversation of trying to recall my MP, which of course is not an easy conversation to have. And in the political temperatures that is in the nation, it is also a risky affair. Sadly, speaking as a lawyer in front of even former Chief Justice, to just be scared to exercise a constitutional right, not aware if you will be the next person in the list of persons being abducted. But for sure, there's a change and there's a shift in the political space, and the young people want accountability, they want better governance, and they do not want the spirit of conforming to how things have been. And as you can see, it's bearing fruit. We are yet to discuss how these fruits look like. But yes, the finance bill is down. The cabinet secretaries are out. And as you've seen, also the IG, who we were also pushing to resign because of all the deaths and the blood that has been shed, has also resigned. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We see that you are making quite some progress. Now I'd like to go to the Gen Z balance, we'd call you. Gen Z and millennial balance, we'd call you the OG, the original gangster. So we'd like to hear from the original gangster. What's the difference between the Gen Z revolution, quote unquote? I know some say it's not a Gen Z revolution, and the revolutions you'd have in the 90s, early 2000, probably the entire 2000. What's the difference, if any?
Yeah, I think what is happening now, people have called it mass action, they've called it uprising, they called it revolution. I think all those terms are applicable. And I wanted to say that I come from I'm persuaded by what Rodney and Samir Amin call links and continuities and small revolutions, giving birth, to others. And these links and continuities, you find them in the history. We can trace resistance from Mektelili, to the present. But what I find, and I think Maryanne said this, is the joke that is doing around that the leaders, the MPs and others are going around trying to find where Gen Z is, not Generation Z, but you know, the Gen reminds me of Idi Amin going to the central bank asking where foreign exchange was. He was not going to work all the time, and he would be told that there is no foreign exchange. So, you know, when Anne was saying it's the issues of leadership, issues of ethnicity and religion, no? It's a revolution that is focusing on the material interests of people. Okay, it's also anchored on the Constitution, so that people cannot come around. I mean, they have tried to do that, to say this is a coup. You know, this is people will be charged with treason and whatnot. But it doesn't stick, because this generation is talking about Article 1 of the Constitution. They're saying, you know, they want to recall these people, or they want to exercise sovereign power, you know, directly. When you look at the what they want to occupy, whether it's parliament, you know, state house, the whole issue of occupation, you know, is actually Article 1, because they're saying they want to exercise their sovereign power, you know, directly. And it's actually a strategy that is unique, you know, because if you go and occupy, you know, the institutions of the state piecemeal, right? It's like the way guerrilla armies fight, you know. You basically capture, you know, key institutions. And I think focus on parliament and the executive is a very powerful thing to do, because it's I saw that the judiciary was also attacked, but I think it was those who attacked the judiciary and the story about criminals and the gangs and the hooligans. This is something that, if you go back to history, has been part of our politics. Okay, in the 70s, there was a group called the Gorokos. You know? They were supposed to deal with cattle rustlers. Okay, but it was a group created within the state that harassed, you know, the late president. They wanted, they were against the constitution as it was, and they wanted the constitution changed. The Gorokos, that you have heard of, groups like Kwekwe, the groups like Flying Squad. There's very names that when they say it, you can actually be fearful. And I think those who are abducting, I think people are now called the rhino. Why the rhino, I don't know. But there has always been these militia, you know. In 1997, we were attacked by a group called Jeshi la Mzee, which was Ngumos. Ngumos was funding them. And there was Mungikiki. So the state has this way of attacking, you know, movements, mass action, uprising or revolution, using, you know, both the official machinery of violence, but also using the you know, the goons and what have you. But, you know, I wanted to say that you know, the Gen Z and millennials I've definitely, started, a revolution that is focused on systematic demands, and once one is given, they move, to the next. And the leaders who emerge, they basically emerge, by and by. When there was a mass action in Kitui, I asked some of my friends there, and they said the person who was leading it was somebody who just started a song and mobilized people, and they marched. So I think it's as long as this thing about leadership is not used in a way to say, because they have no leaders, therefore we need not worry. But the leaders emerge, from movements. And I was also happy that there was this call to occupy IMF and World Bank. It's the first time I've seen, movements that connect the ruling class in Kenya with their masters, abroad. So let me switch off my. So I was talking about occupying IMF and World Bank, and soon we might hear about occupying the WTO. And I think the connection here is that this movement understands the role that IMF has played, and also World Bank, what is called neoliberalism, in denying the youth their material interests, whether it's the issue of education, issue of health, issue of jobs, water, housing, the demands that are being made. So that connection for me is important, and they have definitely breathed life into the Constitution, because they're saying this article should be implemented, and they're asking for accountability. And they're touching on corruption as well, and not just corruption, but also wastage, of resources. And they seem to be very clear that their challenges are there, that they are dealing with political leadership that is of course strong and ruthless, and they are avoiding to be divisions on the basis of ethnicity, religion, and of course money, because money for movements plays an important role. And it's very clear to me also that the movement is an alliance of the middle classes, the youth and the working class as well. And even some people have basically said, oh, these people who are in the demonstrations, they after demonstrations, they go to Java and the Kentucky and other things. So so it's important. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is that history records that the moment a regime starts killing children and the young people, it loses its legitimacy. And that's the beginning of the end of it. Remember the Soweto issue where the kids in South Africa refused the curriculum that was being imposed on them, and you know, they were murdered. Okay, and that was the first bullet that hit the head of the Boer system. And you have other examples. The Vietnam War, when the American students opposed it, you know, and said no to it, it brought home the truth that nations that oppress others also oppress their people. So when IMF and World Bank and the Europeans and the Americans oppress this country, they should also know that they are oppressing their, you know, their own. And the movement is coming at a time when what we see is a great concern on the people on the globe, you know, for humanity. If you look at the mass action around Palestine, for example, or the mass action that took place after George Floyd was shot and killed, not shot, but yeah, basically was the guy choked him to death. There is hope in our world that citizens don't want murderers around, and they don't want kids killed, and they don't want a planet that can't deal with the poverty, and a planet where there's gross inequality. In our own country, if Oxfam is right, you know, we have 8,300 billionaires, and whose assets equals the assets of the rest of us. Okay, so if anybody is sending a message to JM, they should tell him that when he talked about, you know, 10 millionaires and 10 million beggars, now we have 8,300 billionaires, and the beggars are about 50 million. But this is I have got this, you know, this that we've got to see that there are gains being made. You know, there are gains being made around the world when people resist militarism, they resist killings, inequality, and they demand, you know, ecological justice. That consciousness, if it continues to grow, okay, so that the Gen Z in America and the Gen Z in Africa identify both local and external enemies, it will be very, very powerful. And I pray for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, CJ. We pray for such times, and we hope they'll happen in our lifetimes in a big and better way. Now to Professor Ambani, someone we reckon is highly, highly honored to have my permission to speak despite being my boss. This table stand quickly. They didn't take time. Professor Ambani, could you tell us, there seems sometimes to be a divide between the older generation and the younger generation. So Gen Z sometimes feel like, or they think, their parents, who are people like you, the older generation, failed, or they didn't do as well as they are doing. You'd see jokes like, maybe not jokes, you'd see something like tribalism ends with our parents. this allegiance to politicians and political parties ends with our parents, we're doing better. Sometimes you would think the older generation is not woke, for lack of a better word, because if your children think that something like tribalism has to end with you, is that is there a misunderstanding between generations? Is there something, and in reverse, the older generation thinks the younger generation is lacking in many ways? Even when the protests began, there was warnings of let us not hear you people speaking down on Gen Z again. So perhaps you could tell us, and with this protest being a very good example, is there a divide between generations? Welcome, Professor Ambani.
Thank you, Marion, for occupying my office and my powers as a Gen Z. Yeah, good evening. It's good evening already. Good evening, Gen Zs. Yeah, we are back. We are back to this session, and I'm really happy to also debate these issues or reflect on them. On the issue of generations, I think I answered in the previous webinar when I had a conversation with Washira Maina and our other friend, Gen Z, Lorraine Koske. And I think I can repeat the question, the answer I gave then, which is that I've always found that generations have some suspicion. Usually, it's not a new thing. You're not the first people to doubt our contribution, and you're not the first people to doubt your capacity. When we were growing up as 844, for us, we were told, this is watoto wa Moi, watoto wa Nyayo, and I'm still in Nyayo myself, because this institution belongs to Mzee Moi. And Moi had introduced a new education system called 844. And the older generation would mock us, they would crack jokes about it. They say we are half-baked, they say we just drink milk. And I said the way to defeat that usually is to prove yourself. And I think every generation usually has to find a moment to prove themselves. And that's when they get the crown. And so there's always that problem of the future and the past. The future thinks the past did nothing. The past thinks the future will amount to nothing. That one will always be there. And I think I mentioned in that webinar that one of the things that had bothered us, even as teachers, had been that this Gen Z appeared to be zombies many times, not reading, not taking things seriously, anything rigorous, they're stepping out of it. A conference like this, they would give up very fast or not attend, you understand? Always on the phones, even in a car, in class, they're always on the phones. And for me, I've agonized over this for many years. What do they do on those phones 24/7? And not myself alone. Many other people of my age wonder, what would these people amount to? Okay? But what we didn't realize that was a citizenship of your own, a virtual citizenship, and that you are actually already having your own consciousness right there. For a long time, it meant much. It didn't mean much to us because there was no result. But when you walk on the street, I think you proved something. In my view, you proved that you can also take up the earthly citizenship beyond the virtual citizenship. So you're now dual citizens as Gen Z. And that you can do activism online and follow that up with real demonstrations, whether people are being shot or not. The first day, we waited to see whether you'll go back, especially if the police do what they usually do. You actually went back and went back and went back. And you're able to organize national rallies, national demos, national protests, and picketing. And that for me says that you have proven something. I must congratulate Gen Z for that. However, I think I need to point out that is just the beginning. When you're in a revolution, Willy is better at this, you actually think you've moved the earth when you're in it. But many times you have not gone far. It was just a small shake-up here and there. If you don't rush to consolidate the gains that you've made, the past comes back. I remember that when we were in campus that time, like Kibaki, Unatosha time, we actually thought we had wrestled tribalism. It's not the first time you're feeling like this. We united as students, united as young people, we would go to Fungamano, we would go to Huru Park. All those things, Kibaki Tosha, was done by youthful people. It's always youthful people doing it. To our surprise, after Kibaki got power, was surprised that the groupings now began to be which part of Mount Kenya you come from. Kibaki government was very tribal. If Willy was to be to have time and to talk to you freely, he would tell you that in '92 as well, they thought they were fighting corruption, they were fighting authoritarianism in the late '80s, early '90s. But when the real guys came, that is maybe Jaramogi and Matiba, Shikuku, then they realized that those guys were just tribal as the ones they're trying to remove from power. So when you're in it, it feels like you have actually won a battle. But in reality, if you don't consolidate the new values, the old values come back very slowly, and you'll soon realize that that revolution wasn't that effective if you don't consolidate. And so what I usually recommend is that you must keep fighting and win. Put enough pressure and consolidate it. When you see people my age, and you'll notice that we are not very quick to rush to these kind of things, because we were in Huru Park in 2002 saying Kibaki Tosha, only to be disappointed 2-3 years later. By 2005, you guys have not been told this. Kibaki did the same thing Ruto is doing today. Had to shake his cabinet. We had to defeat a terrible constitution is forcing down our throat. So always push and get the things consolidated. I think that's what I'll say for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ambani, for obeying my orders. I ordered you to speak and you spoke. And I feel pretty much, like I'm getting there. Thank you so much. For context, this is my boss. So it's a joy that he speaks only when I allow him to do so. Thank you. Now, before we proceed, the next question would be more or less of a conclusion. We will talk about what next, what happens now that we're here, where are we headed. But before we do that, I would propose that be the conclusion, just putting it out there for your thoughts. Meanwhile, we'd like to hear from the audience. I see a majority Gen Z and some people who are not Gen Z, who are also much welcome to speak. The fire is burning. The fire is burning. To our online audience, you can type your questions and comments and we will note them. For those of us who are joining on YouTube, you can just type your live chat and it will be transmitted. Yes, sir.
My name is Sydney. I believe we are here to do more than just talk. I believe we are here to do more than just talk. I believe we are here to find solutions. Last time we were here, Professor Ambani said, in pursuit of our emancipation, we should decide whether we want to go the way of states like Congo and Somalia. I'll give an example of the French Revolution. After the guillotining of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, France was characterized by consistent political instability, which eventually bled into the Napoleonic Wars. In reference, I feel like our country has reached a point where everything is being met by the phrase Haijatosha. Even after the firing of cabinet secretaries yesterday, everyone was still Haijatosha. And any dissent of Haijatosha is met by being ostracized and being cast out. So, when will enough be enough? Will there be an erosion of people's respect for the sanctity and of administrative decisions after all this?
Thank you, Sydney. So we'll take a couple more questions before we can direct them to be answered. Also, you could perhaps, as you ask your question, state who you would like to answer it. Yeah, we can have the next question. Yes, we can hear from our provost. Okay. Just talk to us, whatever you say, we're hearing.
No. I was just interested, Professor and the two professors. I think even before the questions come, we must establish the drivers of the consciousness that has come up. What are the real accurate triggers? I thought you could shed a bit of light on that, because that could help, apart from just the obvious what we think social network, virtual. I thought that would be a real issue. And I think Professor Ambani, you have alluded to something. We have always assumed as parents that our watoto wanaripikia kwa simu. Hawana future. But like you alluded, something has come up that these guys decide they're coming to the streets at 1 p.m. and they will be so in everywhere in Kenya at that time. So I'm just wondering whether we could also have a framework on how technology, social media, which maybe the older generation has been on what we call the analog, how that has played out, because there's something you mentioned, Professor, which I'm interested in. And I think that we might answer the question and lose sight of it if we don't establish exactly this issue of the consciousness that has come. That I think might be something I thought we need to be aware of. Because when young people move the way they moved, I think Maryanne gave a very good background that I thought was necessary for us to understand. But there's somewhere she told you had somebody led a music and he became a leader and he mobilized. I wonder, what are these conscious mobilizers? Is it just about crowd, or is it observation? Is it joblessness? What is really feeding that conscious mobilizer on the ground? So I just wanted to keep that as a part of our thought as we raise the questions. I'm not sure that any of the professors want to make a comment on that, because it might shape how our questions will be responded to in terms of this conversation.
Yes, I was actually thinking that. See, me and CJ Mutunga, our minds are in sync. He just said something I was thinking. He said, Maryanne Njogu can also respond to Provost's question. Also, just be so you may forget that it has been noted before the public that CJ Mutunga and I, we kind of share thoughts sometimes. So yeah, just putting that out there. Yeah. Now we can hear the next question.
Good evening. I am Anne Karaoke. I have a question for CJ and for Maryanne. To start with, Prof, considering you've been around long enough and you have participated in and witnessed a number of these quote unquote struggles and revolutions, would you agree that one, we have developed a culture of exercising Article 37 as first resort? We have developed a culture of exercising our Article 37 right as first resort. Anything goes wrong, our first response ever is hit the streets. Would you think, in your opinion, have we developed such a culture? Secondly, are there alternative approaches to seeking accountability that do not involve physically occupying all these spaces we are in a bid to occupy? Lastly, as an OG, like Maryanne said, are we the Kenya that you guys fought for? If the Mashujas would be here today, the previous revolutions from before to war, are we meeting your expectations as a country? Are we, worthy what you all went through? Lastly, to Maryanne, do you have an idea of how the end goal will look like? After all said and done, if it will ever be, what will success look like? What will victory look like? Because I think we are celebrating every gain that is coming our way. First of all, how do we know what gains are actual gains and what gains are simply blindfolds? But after all, if this ever comes to an end, what would that look like, especially if it turns out successfully? Thank you.
Can have we can have two more and then get the answers, and then the cycle goes on. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Elvis Soita Shitanda. I'm joining my third year in September. So my question is to any one of you. And from the recent protests, you have seen how the digital space has had a positive impact, whereby it has mobilized the Gen Zs, and also it has enabled them to echo their voices. But I cannot also stop from thinking about the negativity that can come from this, whereby first of all, you have already established that most of us are addicted to our phones and the internet. And as I remember last time, our professor was calling us the netizens of Kenya. And in that line of thought, I was thinking that a scenario whereby someone, because the internet is controlled by people, so someone might use this space to push negative agendas or wrong information, and due to the, if I may say, ignorance among the Gen Z, and as such, it may put us in a predicament. So I was asking, what is your thinking about that?
Thank you, Mr. Soita Shitanda. Yes, we'll have the next question, then we this side. You'll have no question.
My name is Haron.
Elvis, just a minute. Elvis Soita Shitanda. Yeah. Yes, sir, you can go on.
Yes, my name is Haron, 4.2 student. The last time we were here, we found that one of the major cause of change was that most of the Gen Zs are educated. And yesterday, we found one of the changes that the president made was, as he termed it, radical changes to education. So having researching radical legal education myself, I would like to ask a few questions to the CJ. One is, if you were ever involved in any formation of the legal education curriculum. The second is, if at this moment, since we're talking about bills, if we were to change anything in the curriculum of legal education, if it is in terms of legislations, policies, and frameworks, what is it will you add, or what would you take out? And since I'm pretty sure I will not reject such a bill, if such a framework is passed, what kind of benefits and challenges do you see it facing, benefits bringing? And just for a last question, having searched for radical legal education through your life and works, I would love to know the few instances that you actually got it wrong, because every time you do something, you don't actually get it right throughout. So what few instances did you actually try something and you accept that that was not the way forward? Thank you.
We can come to this side. We can take one, and then we get the answers. There's a gentleman here. Okay, we can start there.
Good evening, everyone.
Good
evening. My question relates, first of all, to the question of leadership, and especially the high morals that the movement speaks for itself. You are a contemporary of Museveni. How did he end up where he is now, starting with Rodney and Marx and all those lovely theories, yet he jailed the revolutionaries in Uganda? And also considering that fact, then what is to be said about the idea of a leader emerging from the movement as if it's predestination? Because the other question goes to the assumptions that underlie this moment in time, our political system, well, basically all our lives today, what we think of people, man, woman, and what is good and what should be pursued. How do we redirect all the things we are doing to understanding that question? Because, for instance, one of the things I find interesting in this movement at the moment is there's a fundamental assumption of goodness in the revolutionaries. They are burning with pure justice. There's not a single shred of self-interest within them. But that is not true, because human beings are human beings. How then do we build systems that create better people? Because after all this, our leaders did not come from Mars. They came from within us. As my teacher Ngoya would say, and I hope he'll approve of me repeating this, our leaders are a reflection of who we are as a society. How is it then that we, in our individual capacities, not on Twitter, not on any social media, when we wake up in the morning, when we go to do our jobs, how do we change how we approach our work, ourselves, and what it means to our community and what it means to our country in particular, because at the moment we are bound in this system. And how does that get, because I feel like this movement at the moment, it's so interesting, it's so, everything is up in the air, unaanguka na kila mtu. By the end of the day, and it has to be us, then what? Because democracy has a fundamental understanding of the person that is a democratic citizen. And unfortunately, I think, in my opinion, that person does not necessarily protest. That person sits down and discusses. The question is, how do we think of our Kenyan democracy with the realities we live in? Or better yet, how do we augment the idea of democracy to include this? Because at the end of the day, we have to ask, why are we where we are? Because in all honesty, IMF did not come in knocking on our doors, forcing loans down our throats. We went there. And for all the lovely things we could say about how we do not, we should not carry the responsibilities of the people who carry those loans. We are lawyers. When you go to the courtroom, you will not tell someone, you're not responsible because it is your father who carried it. If you do that, you will not get jobs, my dear friends. But either way, how do we deal with the things we are as people? Where is the personal responsibility in all of this?
Thank you. Thank you. We can have, there's a gentleman here who's been raising his hand. You must have a muscle by now. So here's your chance. You can stand and face the camera also.
Yeah, so good evening.
Good evening.
Gideon to it. My question I posed to Advocate Maryanne Njogu. How has growing up in the digital world shaped Gen Z's worldview and cultural preferences? And what role do platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube play in the shaping their identities and values? And the second question is, how is the Gen Z reshaping education and workplace norms? And what are their expectations for career developments, work-life balance, and professional fulfillment in that? Most of them in the streets, they were carrying banners saying that they want jobs that tuna kazi, and most of them actually are educated. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to hand the mics over to the panelists to answer. But before that, allow me to read a question from Zoom. It's by Simon Gitonga, who notes that he's also not in the legal profession. Thank you so much, Simon, for joining us. We are very happy that you're here. We are extremely happy that you are here. You ask that, you mentioned that, Prof Ambani mentioned that the young generation should consolidate their achievements. And one of them is the Reject Finance Bill. That was a sound achievement. It can be argued. You understand that even though the bill was defeated, we still have the Appropriations Act. And you want to know if it poses any threat to Kenyans. And should it be next on the agenda of rejections? Thank you for your question. We'll start the responses with Maryanne. Maryanne, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will start with the conversation from where I used to call him Revo, so allow me to just call him Revo, was that what drives our consciousness, and especially those who are being seen as if they are the ones who are helping to mobilize the rest of the young people, or what we are calling the Gen Z movement. In responding to this, I would like to start by saying this is one generation And that ties to the questions that also have come up in terms of technology. This is one of the generations that are well informed. If there is something that social media technology has done, is make the young people consume information. And they consume all kinds of information, including bad, including good, politics, sports. It is a very well informed level of education in terms of what is happening in the society. And they're also having with them across a whole wide range of people's ideas and thoughts. As we are seated here, we are trying to have a conversation. I'm trying to understand how the CJ Emeritus point of view and how he thinks. I'm learning from him. The same I am doing with Professor Ambani, who was also my dean. This platform in itself, as we're discussing and exchanging ideas, is what is available to the young people on an everyday basis on every other agenda. If it's police brutality, if it's in terms of mismanagement, if it is in terms of the policies that have been introduced, the bill, they have the advantage of giving their opinion, getting responses, different ways of thinking, and that is what is informing the consciousness of why they're taking the action they're taking. So once we've started with a conversation, and I'll give an example, yes, back again to me. It just starts with a simple, I had a conversation, let us recall our MP, and because of 1, 2, 3 things, stemming also from his actions before the finance bill, then the actions during the finance bill. And in that conversation, then I decided, okay, I volunteered to be a petitioner. I could have volunteered to be a drafter as a lawyer, but then I was like, how many people will be willing to have their names on the front line? So I volunteered on that. Later on, when I had the petition, I wanted to have the idea of what is the feel of the ground. I have the petition, but what is the feel of the ground? So I decided to tweet it. And I think some of you saw my tweet, yeah, which surpassed my expectations in terms of the volume of response. So I tweeted, people of Daguchi South, get in touch. I have a petition. Let's discuss on recalling our MP. The tweet, as we speak, has over 10,000 retweets, has over 14,000 likes, and over 500 comments, right? In that conversation, I got feedback from very many people of how they feel and what they want and how they want to recall. And now it suddenly became, where are you? Let us organize. Come to the ground. Where can we find you? Where can we drive the conversation? Others came and said, I'm from this ward. What help do you need? I'll help you collect signatures. Others came and said, I saw you're a wakili. I'm also a wakili. Can I join in the legal, in checking the legal, if you're following the procedures and if you're within the law? And just like that, you have a whole team that is coming up. And in this team, there are those people who are going to be loud. Yeah, they're going to be loud in terms of their voice. They're going to raise their voice more. And there are those ones who are going to follow silently, but they're going to implement the things we're discussing. And that is how you end up having that there are people who seem like they're leaders, but in real sense, they are not. It's just that they have the voice and they have the outreach. If you look at the people who are being targeted and even abducted, majority of them, starting that we got Mike Mushiri released yesterday. If you look at Mike Mushiri, for example, he's not really a leader of in the very sense of this movement, right? But when he sees the discussion ongoing, he amplifies it with his thought. But because he has a multitude of people who follow him, then his thought and his message becomes more amplified. So when you look at it from the general view, it looks like Mike Mushiri might be leading this Gen Z movement. It looks like Mike Mushiri might be mobilizing. But what is just happening is ideas are being shared, and as they're being shared, those ones who have more numbers and outreach, it's being propagated to reach more people. At the start, I did not have following in terms of Twitter. Yeah, and that is why I wasn't expecting actually very big feedback. But because there are people who share in the idea of let's recall this MP for 1, 2, 3 reasons, that is why you find this tweet has over 10,000 retweets. They are trying to make sure the message that they agree with reaches a bigger context. And if you see the likes, they're trying to show you, okay, and if you see the comments, they're trying to share their ideas. And that is how all these things are coming about. So even if you join our space, and I would ask even the older generation, when you see a space happening, join. Because in this space, it starts with a host and a few people who are willing to be speakers to start the conversation. And they start by analyzing, for example, yesterday's outcome, because after yesterday's announcement, breaking news, there was space. Yeah, and there were actually two different space. And they will start this conversation. They will start like 4 speakers and a host. And later on, when the crowd joins in and they're listening to their conversation, you will click a button to request to speak because you've not been given the right to be a speaker. And they will increase in terms of what they think should be done, what they think is the outcome, if they believe even, for example, firing the CS, will it help, will it not? And this is informing how we are thinking and the patterns that we are taking. But in terms of the people who seem to be mobilizers, it is more of they are the voice, they have a louder voice and they have a bigger following. And which is actually unfortunate that it's a good thing, yes, in social media, but it also raises the chances of them being targeted. To the question of what our goal looks like. Let me start by saying this transformation, what we are calling a revolution, like Professor Ambani has said, is just the beginning. It is for sure the beginning. The best that we can do is to every time, like we are saying, let us recount our wins, let us reflect, and then let us re-strategize and organize. The reason why I'm saying it's gonna take time and years, and it's just the beginning of asking for accountability. When it started with the pressure of the finance bill. If the finance bill had been withdrawn at the very early stage when young people went to the streets, there are certain demands that are on the table right now that would not have been there. But the minute people died and shed blood, and to the extent that even goons were deployed by different people in the government to come and distract the protests, then the goals now change. They stop being content with the end, with the shooting down of the finance bill, and now a new issue has come up, which is police brutality and the deaths and the killings. And now they're back on the streets demanding for justice for the people who are dead. On top of that, they now see, okay, we are being led by incompetent leaders who are willing to pay. We are complaining about how the funds are being used, and you're willing to pay certain people to come and destroy property, to loot, so that it can have a backlash on the protests that are ongoing, instead of just sitting down and listening to what the people are saying and trying to meet them at their point of view, or trying to meet the reasonable demands, if any, that they are asking for. Then you go back home and you feel like, why should I come back and sit down? Is this really the government that I want to lead us? And there's something that this CJ Emeritus has said. Once you start killing young people, you lose your legitimacy. And that is why now there's a new hashtag that says, you cannot kill us and lead us. So in terms of the goals, currently the conversation keeps shifting, but the basic demands that are there is, one, we want to see actions on corruption. Yeah, we want to see active active ideas on how they're going to deal with corruption. We also want to see accountability. Like, we're starting even that conversation of NHIF, the money that has been lost. Has anyone been fired? Has anyone been resigned? Who is being questioned? So we want to see the issues of accountability being taken into account. We wanted also, for example, the conversation shifted. People have died, so the IG and Bungei need to resign, and they went back to be pushing for those ideas. And like you have seen, the IG has resigned. Now the conversation has already changed. We've moved from the IG to Bungei. So in terms of how this revolution is working, there are certain minimums that are now being asked for because of the outcome of the protests for the finance bill. But this conversation needs to continue going. But what will it look like to me as a Gen Z and the fellow Gen Zs I've been having a conversation with? The institutions that we have there, because someone asked, must we always be going to the streets to protest? Ordinarily, institutions are put in place to effect change, right? But when the institutions are not working, then now you are forced to go to the streets to force either the institutions or the change of institutions so that they can work. So what will this goal look like? We want to see a change, and this change also has to start with voters, not just leaders. It has to start with us, the generations above us, and the voting and the lines in which we vote, all the way unto the leaders. It will start with us voting objectively. It will go ahead again for you to understand that you don't need to exercise your Article 1 every once in 5 years. If you vote a leader into power, into a position and they do not meet the standards that are there in terms of leadership, Article 6, or they do not perform their mandate, or they are corrupt, or they are mad with or offenses under our law, that you do not need to wait until 5 years for you to send them home. And when the time is right, you're able to exercise the power that belongs to the people to either recall them or to get them fired or sent home. We need to see that kind of pressure, temperature that is there, that when you enter into a position, you know you have to perform or you have to go back home. And that is what we want to actually see, that the public service becomes such an attractive place for thieves and lazy people, that this is a position where everyone looks at you, you need to perform, and if you do not perform or you do not meet certain requirements, then there are consequences that come with it. Once the country starts to move like that in how they choose their leaders, in how the leaders perform, and if the institutions that we have and the arms of government work, then we will see we are moving towards actualizing what we think these schools would look like.
Thank you. Just thank you. Now I'd like to invite Prof Ambani to give his responses.
Thank you, my boss.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for occupying. Yeah, GenZ, good to be with you and to hear Maryanne, who was my colleague here before she went to Kenya School of Law. Very, very good to see her looking great there and saying great things also, doing great things also for the country. I think I will just respond to 3 questions that I thought so that the rest can go to other people. One, I want to respond to what Revo, I also call him Revo. I think we had a fondness so, yeah, before we became provost, but I'll get used slowly. Is about the internet, and I discussed it. We had another webinar before this, maybe 2 weeks ago, about the nature of the internet, the way I see it, and how it could have affected this revolution. Number one is, I think that the internet has no hierarchies, or that the hierarchies can be very temporary. So it appears to me that if you have a following, then you get power. To get a high following, you get power, more numbers, power, but they can unfollow you very, very soon. In fact, on one day, you can lose all the following. So that's the kind of world the GenZ live in. There are also a lot of exchanges, matusi, on internet. People say things like, that's the reason I'm not on Twitter, because anytime I've gone to Twitter, I've just seen people accusing each other. Say if I got somebody's phone and they showed me something on Twitter, I get scared about how people communicate there. And I suspect that Gen Zs have lived like that. You see big people that we respect, ministers, judges, just being brought down by 3-4 lines. And you get used to that. That's the nature of that space. The other thing about that space is that there's a lot of information. And I think I agree with Maryanne about this. A lot of information on the internet, which is not bad. Information is always good. The problem with that information is it's uncensored. And in the last conversation, I mentioned a conversation I had from the former pressman of our former president, Mzee, our very own founder, Linjiru. And he said something that stuck in my head about what journalists would do. Typically, journalists would mediate the information. They would not relay it as is. So that, and he would say, Mzee Moi would be in Kabarak every Sunday. And he would talk to those high school students and encourage them to work hard. He said it would be stupid to report that Mzee asked Kabarak High School students to work hard because he's the president of the entire republic. So what you do as a journalist is that you translate that information and say, he asked all candidates sitting exams this year to work hard. That's what you see in the media. So the information stops to be divisive because the media has mediated it. Or images of death, injury. The other day I saw pictures going around on the internet of someone's head blown out. We never saw that. Even when Wakina Willy were doing their revolutions in the 90s. We never saw those extreme pictures circulating, yet those things happen. So all of a sudden your kids are using your phone and they can see somebody's brains on the street. That's scary. Or they could also see your gadget. You bought an expensive watch. The pictures are taken of it very fast and they circulate. That was not possible with the media. Media would never have done such a thing. Formal media, traditional media would never have done, would never have picked a minister's phone or minister's shoe and circulated that. So they're seeing a lot of information that nobody has taken the care for or concern for, but then it reaches everyone instantly across the world. So I think that affects them. So I was noting some other things that I could remember from the other conversations we had. The other point was that revolutions have happened on the internet. Gen Zs have seen that. You probably were just going to see football, then you realize there's Me Too. And you've seen very big guys in Hollywood fall. You've seen very big guys in certain industry fall just because of the power of the internet. They've also seen roads must fall. They've seen many revolutions of that internet, and that registers in their mind. And then a consciousness forms, I think. I think a consciousness has been forming among the Gen Z, which is why we end up here. And then something else that I want to say Kenya's dictators are foolish, because it is the one thing that, like Waziri would say those days, either drink deep or do not test. Democracy is like that. If you want democracy, either drink deep or don't give people. I think since the days of Chief Justice here, we have been democratizing bit by bit. And also, our government has gone very far with internet penetration. Kenya is among the countries in the world I was surprised where internet is fast, it's good quality, and it's nearly everywhere. So our Gen Z can access information anywhere. The gadgets available, they are cheaper. They're not what they, in the beginning, they're a bit expensive. Now they're smartphones at as low as 3,000 shillings. I knew there was a change when, if I digress a bit, in the past, we would get, somebody would be asking for house help from the Kakamega, and you live in Nairobi, so they ask you to pick the house help from the stage. In the past, you would see a house help immediately and know that is a house help. Over time, you couldn't tell the difference. The way they are dressed, as good as Beyonce, because of what they are seeing, isn't it? They are not Washamba anymore. There are no Washambas in Kenya because of this kind of information flow. So that's the Gen Z you are dealing with. And so, Reverend, I think that is the kind of environment that then precipitates this kind of revolution. And if I was to also join my son, Soita Shitanda, I also mentioned that the internet shouldn't be celebrated quickly. And my problems were several. I could just mention three. One, that internet is wholly foreign. And I have a problem with Gen Z on this. We must also create our own stuff. Whether it is Facebook, whether it is Instagram, whether it is Twitter, it is foreign. They're all foreign companies. And the worst part of it is that they're actually monopolies. This is the one area where even the US law against monopolies was suspended. The US never does monopolies, but on this issue, they actually suspended the monopolies law to allow things like Facebook to flourish. Be careful about monopolies. And because of the third reason I'm mentioning here, they can interfere with your conversation. I will not be surprised. I'm still very sure that some algorithms were changed to ensure these conversations get the headlines, gets the trending that it has gotten of Gen Z. Somebody can decide what trends and what doesn't trend. Internet is about algorithms, it's about some patterns that can be controlled at certain areas. And we must be very careful about that. And then Sydney was asking, I think that's the last question I have to answer, about when is enough. And I think it goes with what Maryanne also answered. And when Maryanne spoke, I kept thinking about some of my earlier writers. I read about the Biafra War, the HBS, when I read about Sarawiwa, those kind of later fighting for resource equality in the Delta region later, is that you start a revolution and then it peaks and you find that you have to keep responding to your enemy. And your game is as good as the enemy. Mandela said that. I'm sure Chief Justice will tell you he went through that. And that's where Gen Zs are. You do this today, they do that tomorrow. You have to react. You do this today, they do that tomorrow. You have to react. And many times revolutions end up being not very useful because of that. First, you reacted into it. You just saw something that annoyed you, then you reacted. Then you continue reacting all through without getting to the end. That explains why every time there's a coup in Africa, there are celebrations, people are on the street. 2 years later, the situation is the same. When Said Barre was removed in Somalia, we never thought that up to now, around 91, if I remember, we never imagined that up to now Somalia would look like that. I'm among the few people you might want to know this, Kenaya and Njiko and Letitia celebrated when Mobutu was removed by, I liked Loho Kabila. I really liked him. And to my surprise, he was killed. His son in power, and things didn't even get better. I'm one of those fans for Garang in South Sudan. I used to celebrate him. Look at where South Sudan is now. It's because you react without thinking thoroughly about it. Then you keep reacting forever. Then before you know it, you've lost everything. Or you win a bit of it. So what should happen in my view, then as I close therefore, and Sydney, that's my answer to you, is that you must have perspective. Mamdani talks about this. You must think through the problem holistically first. What is the enemy we are fighting? Which is the animal we are going for? If we have gone to the park for an elephant and then a gazelle passes around, we shouldn't take too much time on the gazelle. Let's go for the elephant. So we must define our war. We must define our strategy and tactics, in my view. Something else, it needs vision. It needs people who can carry that vision. And visionaries have to be philosophers. Can't be crowds. Crowds can't be visionaries, but they can help. Crowds are very useful in forcing change, like we pushed the Kayo to come down using crowds. And then we must have tact. We must be able to implement that all the way to the ground. That is serious business. Let no one lie to you. That's really serious. And that's why I was telling Willy over lunch that I respect him for having been able to. The only person I know who has changed the government bureaucracy in this country. The only reformed institution from where I sit is the judiciary. And I know why, because he's a philosopher, he thinks, and he knows how to put together teams. He always has a vision. The first vision in the judiciary was Willy Mutunga's. Since then, every chief justice actually comes up with a vision, if you have noticed. So if you are throwing words, sloganeering in the internet, that won't do much. You have to go to the root of the problem, and later we can discuss that root if we have another, in my view, another forum. So I think that would be the thing. Define the war, get the people who are knowledgeable in IQ, in EQ, in vision, in strategy, in tact, and who are committed to this, to live for it or to die for it. And not one critical mass of people. That's how I see it. Thank you very much. And I don't think I'm speaking again, so God bless you.
Yeah, you won't. Thank you for your responses. You forgot to mention that you're actually honored that I allowed you to speak. Yeah, but I note that for myself. I think in answering Sydney, you have answered the question that I was to ask on the way forward, a strategy. I think you have elaborated that very well. And I think there will be no need to then ask that question again because you have answered it. As I invite CJ to speak, I would like to read a comment by one Samson Moshiri, who is joining us on Zoom and is noting a follow-up to Elvis's question. Soita Shitanda, that is. He notes that the age of information is also the age of misinformation. But however, the very resource of a people openly calling out the government on the internet is working against misinformation in form of fake announcements or fake news, even from each other. Additionally, technology and exposure had significantly mitigated most of government's power of the internet, including their power to shut off the internet or censor information. Thank you, Samson Mushiri. And now to our OG. Welcome. Welcome. Talk to us. Address us.
5 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll pick the questions, not all of them. At least, flagged the issue of Museveni. And I think it's a great question. Because Museveni in Dar es Salaam, yes, he was revolutionary. He was the chair of what was called University Students African Revolutionary Front. And he actually democratized teaching method in Dar, because he resisted what we used to call academic terrorists, the kind of professors who, if they are talking and you ask a question, they tell you, shut up, you interfering with my train of thought. So he was that kind of a person. And if you want to know more about him, in Dar es Salaam, there's a book called Cheche, published by Mkuki na Nyota. Okay, so it shows it has that struggle, and he was always wearing military fatigues, and he always had bodyguards. I don't know, what he was afraid of, but he's always been a militarist. And so you ask, what happened? He didn't deal, with the enemies of Uganda. He really got compromised. In my view, became, a dictator. And in the process, whenever he talks about his past, those of us who are in Dar, abuse him on Twitter. So that's why I can't go to Uganda. Life will be in danger. But it can happen. It's happened to a lot of revolutionaries all over the world, because dunia ina wenyewe. Okay, so our leaders fight these leaderships in different ways. Some accept the orders, others are able to navigate around the orders. But what is consistent is that leaders who are captured by foreign interests don't come to us as people to, to ask us to fight that battle. They don't consult us. And that's the major problem with, a lot of leadership. Because I think in Africa, and in these days we are talking about the stage of the planet. If we are talking about alternative leadership in Kenya, the minimum for me is a leadership that is able to stand up to foreign interests. Okay? That is very, 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 very important. They will do that by asking us to join in that struggle. Secondly, they have to be different leaders than what we see now. People who divide us on ethnicity, religion, people who steal our resources, people who waste our resources, people who kill us. They don't respect the Constitution. So, in my view, an alternative leadership has really to be the nemesis of what we have. When Museveni came to power in 1986, people loved him, okay, because Uganda was but after that, it changed. Now, he wants, I think, his son to be president, his daughter to be this, and he's become a monarch. And the Uganda is a dangerous place for him. So my fear is that if Museveni dies, tonight, natural causes like constipation or are not being shot, Uganda will not be the same again. It won't be the same because the issue of succession is not, is not, sorted out. So I think we have to be, as we have these movements, as they happen, let's tell them, even the Gen Z, what we expect as a minimum. We don't want a leadership that divides this country on the basis of ethnicity. Our problems are caused by, principally, by the big five and not the animals. We all know them because the coalitions are around, the big five. And you have seen how they have come together, because they are, they have a following. So any alternative leadership that doesn't deal with that issue, and that's why the Gen Z, when people say that it's non-ethnic, that's a, it's a plus for me, and I think it can be seen as a movement that is agitating for, alternative leadership, equitable distribution of resources, the face of Kenya in whatever is being done. And I think our youth have a great opportunity to, to do that, judging by, what's going on. Somebody has to ask whether we are okay with what is going on. I don't know who asked that question, that great question. Somebody asked, are you okay with what we are doing? Yeah, talking about myself personally, I'm okay with it, because as you grow older, and you see the status quo is becoming more oppressive, you wonder whether you will see any freedom before you die. So anything that happens like this, it's a joy. It's a joy when young people rebel, when they are angry, and when they are particularly demanding their material interests. Whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's housing, whether it's security, all those issues are very, 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 very important. Whether it's crisis, whether it's Unga revolution, all those things that are triggers. I think, people who have been fighting for this material interest will not really have a problem with that. Then Aaron, I think, is the one who asked whether I participated in any change of curriculum. Yes, in the University of Nairobi, we had a big debate on how law should be taught. And you can follow that, in my inaugural lecture. I talked about it, and we decided that law has to be taught within its historical, socio-economic, cultural, scientific, theological, and even technological context. The challenges were that, again, when you have gains, consolidating gains is also part of struggle. And the reversals, can happen. And sometimes you might feel, you might ask yourself, was I wrong? Were we wrong in basically seeking that particular solution. And so it's true. There's no human being who doesn't get it wrong, you know. And the important thing that I've learned in my life is you have to value your critics. You know, just forget people who, you know, who would say what you want to hear, but your critics are important, okay? I grew up in a place where there was what people call a madman in the market. Every market has a madman. And as kids, we used to listen to this guy called Munyasi Nzamba. And he made a lot of sense to us. The questions he was asking and the stuff he was saying. But the grown-ups never, you know, they never listened to him. You see? And I think it's Lenin who said, or it could be another revolutionary, that insane people have sane moments. So that's another area of listening to critics. Even the people who you say, you know, this person is bipolar, is so boring, you know, I don't want to listen to him. If he's speaking on television, switch off. Even those of you who basically say, our president tells lies by accident, please, you have to listen to him. Because if you don't, there is a problem. So value your critics. Don't be afraid to get things wrong, because that's the beginning of getting them right. And you know, let's all of us, and I think Liz was raising that issue. We've got to have a vision of the kind of planet we want, you know, and the kind of the vision of the kind of Kenya we want. And I see this movement as addressing that issue. Every time they talk about wastage, they talk about this and the other, you know, corruption, you know, opulence and arrogance, and you know, it's these are about the problems that are triggers, you know, and I think the GenZ has frightened them enough, you know. Na waendelee kushuka tu, basi tutakuwa sawa. Asanteni.
Wow. Sometimes I think that you are Gen Z who happened to be born way before Gen Zs began to be born, because you are so with us. What a way to end. Ashuke tu. Very cool, very cool. Thank you for that. It's a good way to end. Na sisi pia tungependa kushuka kwa leo. Tungependa kushusha mkutano huu. We have come to the end, and you may note that CJ Mutunga also answered the question on our way forward. And I see that one of his proposals is that we listen, even if we do not like what we're being told or whoever is speaking to us, who in this case would be the president. Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much, Babu Jaji, aka OG, for making time to come all the way here and join us today. Thank you very much, Maryanne, for making the time to join us from wherever you joined us from. I know this was on very short notice. Thank you very much for making the time, sincerely. And Professor Ambani, it has been a good session, and you're welcome. It could have gone badly, but it did not. And you must be grateful. And yes, you're welcome. Maybe in the spirit of humility, I could thank you for joining us at your school. Yeah. Yeah, and let me thank also the Professor Justice Mutunga, and well, I guess I have to thank Professor Ambani for coming up with the ideas, for this session. Thank you, CJ Mutunga. I know this was your brainchild. Thank you for convening us here today. I'd like to thank some people who have done an excellent job. They have outdone themselves. They have put in their best foot forward, really. I have bothered them quite a lot, and they have showed up. Thank you, Stanley. You have seen Stanley. He's the man behind the camera. It takes a lot for these things to be here. So thank you. Thank you and your team. Thank you, Anthony Carl, the most dedicated designer I've met. Anthony, perhaps you could stand because I don't think people know you. Yeah, that's Anthony Carl. He's a model student. He is a model student, very dedicated, and you put in 100%, and we appreciate it. Thank you also, Russell, the guy behind the sound. Thank you, Crystal, also on the sound. Thank you, King David. You did some heavy lifting here. Caleb Sadala, thank you. Letitia, thank you for lending us your help. Same as Prince Victor. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Gregory. Thank you, Kenai. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Anne. Thank you to our talented performing artist by the name Gibson. Thank you to all the members of faculty who joined us today in absentia. I think Mr. Malenya has stepped out. Thank you, Mr. Sipala. Thank you to our provost. Thank you for supporting our law school. I'm not particularly in charge, but I do feel your support. Thank you very much. On behalf of the dean, we are very grateful. Today I have authority over him, so take my word for it. We are very grateful. And that's the end of this discussion. Thank you to all of you who have sat through, students who are seeking knowledge, and you are here to just gather wisdom. Thank you to all of you who've dedicated your time to be here. We do not take it for granted. Thank you, Lizzie, who's not our student, but is our child. And we are very happy that you joined us. And thank you. Yeah. Happy to have you always. And now we'd like to have a closing prayer and then we close. But before that, we'd like to do the honors of joining or maybe being in sync with the mood of the nation. And we'd like to sing the current anthem, not the national anthem, although it probably should be, but the anthem of the nation right now, as decided by Gen Z. And our performing artist, whom, as I mentioned, it took a lot for us to get him here. And I know he's busy and booked, but he found the time for us. Mr. Gibson, welcome, leaders, as we sing this. Perhaps, not perhaps, we should join this one. You know the song. It's Erikwa Inaina Daima. So you can sing one stanza and a chorus. And then we can have a closing prayer. And we'll see each other next time. Yes. Do we want to stand and sing that? You'd be happy to. And when did you get a violinist to play for you as you sing it? Gibson, take it away. Okay, wait. Who thinks they have a good voice? You don't even think, let alone having, you don't think you have good voices over here? You're all frogs. Tame, I know you have a good voice. Come and lead us in song. You don't know the lyrics of Daima by Erikwa Inaina? We cancel you right now.
Cancel me.
Take it away. Guide us. hata kama ni lazima tuungane, tujenge nchi yetu. Naishi natumaini, najitolea daima Kenya, hakika ya bendera wangu dunia damu amani imani Kenya wanaishi ndo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We can now have a closing prayer from Vicky. Victoria Okeke. Thank you very much. Really appreciate Gibson once again. You can't even sing. Appreciate the only talented person in the room. Appreciate him again. Thank you so much. Welcome, Vicky.
Okay, let us pray. Father God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for the gift of good health. Thank you for being with us in this session. Oh God, when we started, we called upon you and you helped us throughout it, even up to this time. Thank you, God, for the lessons that we've learned. Lord, may you help us, even as we go about our daily lives, help us to do the right things, to make our own contributions to the society in order to make a better nation. Be with us, oh God, even in the rest of our activities today. Pray that you may bless our panelists, be with them, bless them, oh God, even in good life and good health. In Jesus' name we've prayed. Amen.